Hello folks, welcome to another DIY video on the 2014 Kia Sportage with the 2-liter diesel engine. And we're here the very next day after I just replaced the 4 brake hoses on the car. And as I mentioned there, it's only natural that I also spend a bit of time right now to go with you through the procedure of replacing the brake fluid as well. Now, in a moment, I'll give you details about the age and mileage of the car and the age of the brake fluid. But the summary is the fluid that we have in our car in this very second does not need changing at all. Which is why today's video is going to be focused primarily on the brake fluid changing procedure rather than the actual removal of the fluid. And as always, I'll do my best to give you as many details as possible, which I hope you will find useful and helpful. And since I'm filming this back-to-back against the video with the Kia's brake hoses, obviously the car hasn't moved in between, so it's got the same age and kilometers, a little bit over 182,000. Now, the last time I changed the brake fluid was at the end of August 2021. So slightly less than 2 years, given that right now it's June 2023. And at that point, the car had 141,700 kilometers. So with this current brake fluid, it traveled for almost 2 years and almost 40,000 kilometers. Now I'm going to be using exactly the same fluid, ATE Typ200, which is actually rated to last for 3 years rather than 2. But it makes sense to change it given that I've touched the brake hoses as well. Now let's head over to the car. And let's start by me actually showing you the state of the fluid. And here it is. And this is how new fluid looks like, namely clean and amber. Now the reservoir is slightly overfilled. Hopefully you can see here on the side that there's a marking labeled max here and minimum down there. And obviously it's slightly overfilled because I overfilled it yesterday as I was bleeding the brake hoses. But this is not going to affect us because as we're going to bleed some more during this video, the level is inevitably going to come down. Now, a while back, I did the brake fluid replacement video for the Range Rover. And in that film, I actually spent a good amount of time talking about different types of brake fluids and the ideal brake fluid changing interval, so I won't go over those observations in as much detail. I'll put a link to that video in the description if you're curious to learn more. But the summary is this: the recommended changing interval for the brake fluid is normally about 2 years. In my particular case, this is the fluid that I've used almost 2 years ago and yesterday and today as well. And this one, as I said, is rated for 3 years. And it is pretty good quality fluid. I've had no issues with it over time. But more importantly, I would recommend that you periodically check the state of your fluid in the reservoir. And if you see it's gotten dirty or it's starting to turn brown or worse, going towards black, then you're at a point where you should seriously consider doing this change. And in addition, if you need a tool to tell you what the state of the fluid is, you can always get yourself one of these small pen-like devices that take one simple battery. And they have these indicators here, which tell you just how much water you have in the system. The idea being that if it's over 4%, then the fluid needs changing immediately. The way this thing works, and you can get it from AliExpress or something, it's really cheap, a couple of bucks. It has this cap with the 2 pins that you're supposed to submerge in the fluid. And then with the battery on, you press the button and it lights up one of the LEDs in accordance with the state of the fluid. And as we expect, ours being almost new has 0% water in it, which confirms what I said at the beginning, that we don't really need to change it right now. And one other observation, brake fluid is probably amongst the worst fluids in the car that you need to interact with. It's highly toxic, meaning you don't really want to spill it on the ground so as not to attract small animals, children, heaven forbid, and so on. And it's also highly corrosive on paint. If you drop any of this on paint, go on and clean it immediately. Don't let it sit. Damage occurs in less than 5 minutes. Okay, let me take this away and let me close the reservoir for now. And let's start by talking a bit about some technical aspects of the brake system inside the third generation Kia Sportage from 2010 to 2016. And the first important thing to mention, I'll put a link to this webpage in the description. It's actually a good and freely available, even though partial, workshop manual, which you can use and which I have been using for a while. And I'm gonna draw your attention to this particular chapter, which says that our Sportage is equipped with dual diagonal braking systems. Namely, each front wheel is paired with the rear wheel in its diagonal, and which means, for example, that if you get a brake fluid leak at one of the wheels, you won't lose all of the pedal braking, but only about half of it. And this is also gonna be relevant in a few minutes when I discuss the brake bleeding order at the wheels. And on a different page from the same website, you also get some technical specifications, one of which is relevant is this one, the boosting ratio of the brake booster. Now, in the brake hose changing video, you'll notice that for each of the wheel, after I bled the hose with the engine off, I always turned the engine on and applied the brake repeatedly to make sure that I don't have leaks. The main reason is this particular boosting ratio, with the rationale being that you may encounter, though hopefully you never do, situations in which a leak doesn't develop if you apply the brakes with the engine off and no boost, but it does occur once boost is active. Just to give you a hypothetical example, let's say you change the brake fluid and you don't torque the bleeder valve to spec, and for one reason or another you under torque it at some critical value where a leak will only occur as you're driving and as the brake pressure is normally multiplied by the booster. And lastly, here's the page about brake operation and checking for leaks, as I mentioned them before. A schematic of the brake system. Details about brake bleeding, i.e. the procedure I'll be showing you in a few minutes. And a very important detail, which you see down here, is the bleeding order at the wheels. And you'll notice that the order is rear right, front left, rear left, and front right. So diagonally. And this may be, let's say, a little counterintuitive, because the general theory is that you always bleed the brakes in decreasing order of the distance from the wheel to the brake booster or ABS module. But this is actually the order that we'll be following, knowing that our Sportage has dual diagonal circuits. And with that said, let's head over to the car now. And let's take a quick look at the braking components in the car. So here we have the brake fluid reservoir that we saw earlier. Behind it is the brake booster, right? The one with the 9:1 multiplication when the engine is running and supplying it with vacuum. And the reservoir is underneath the driver's side, or towards the left of the car as you're looking forward. Moving on towards the right, over here is our ABS module. And you see how the module has two thicker pipes connected to its side. These are the feeder and return lines of fluid from and to the reservoir, and four thinner pipes that emerge from it and go to each of the wheels. Now let's take a look at these 4 pipes. The one in the front here, if you follow its course, goes down here. You see it over there, and actually emerges right here, hooking up to the brake hose that provides brake fluid pressure to the front right wheel. The remaining 3, which you hopefully see down there, move towards the left side of the car. Now one of them goes underneath the ECU and the battery to emerge at the front left wheel. I mean this one. As for the 2 that go towards the rear of the car, here they are. You can see them here again towards the left side of the car. And they go all the way back, hiding behind this plastic panel. And they then emerge here to the left of the diesel fluid reservoir and continue their path to this point where they separate, with this one here emerging above the anti-roll bar at the rear to feed the rear left hose. Finally, that is the one for the rear right wheel, which goes from one side of the car to the other, above the rear diff, all the way to the rear right brake hose. Now, why did I go through these details? Well, in order for us to actually determine, as an exercise at the very least, the decreasing order of pipe length from the ABS module to each of the wheels. And given what I've shown you, it's pretty obvious that the longest pipe goes to the rear right wheel, the second longest goes to the rear left wheel, the third longest or second shortest goes to the front left wheel, and the fourth longest or the shortest goes to the front right. And this actually correlates well with the fluid changing order that we've seen in the technical documentation a bit earlier, in the sense that we should always start with the rear right wheel, and here we have a choice. We can continue then with the front left because they're on the same circuit, and obviously the pipe to the front left is shorter than the pipe to the rear right, and then do rear left followed by front right. Or if you don't want that and you want to adhere strictly to the decreasing distance rule, then it's going to be rear right wheel first, rear left wheel second, front left wheel third, and front right wheel fourth, in that order. But as I said, in our case, we'll do the bleeding according to the manual in the diagonal pattern. So, without further ado, let's get to work. And the first step when bleeding the brakes, as always, is to open the brake fluid reservoir, and before you open it, always clean its surroundings, especially underneath the cap, because you don't want dirt and dust and everything to fall in. In our case, it's clean from yesterday. You open the reservoir, and you should always stop the fluid to the max line. Okay, in my case, I added a bit more because, as I said, I know we're going to be removing it, but the general rule is always to the max and not more. And now we can head over to the rear right wheel and start working. So here we are at the rear right wheel, which I will be taking off simply because I want to offer you a better viewing angle for the bleeding. But it's important to note that you don't really have to take any of the wheels off when you do the brake bleeding for this car, which is, if anything, an extra safety measure. You would just need to put the car on some bricks or something just to raise its clearance by a few more centimeters. And then you can simply crawl underneath. And as you can see, there's a lot of space from the bleeder to the side of the wheel, more than enough to put a spanner in order to open and close the bleeder, and also to put a tube in to drain the fluid. And as a matter of fact, when I changed the fluid in August 2021, I did just that. I didn't want to take any of the wheels off, and I managed to do the procedure without too much trouble. But given that our car right now is still fully suspended from the work on the hoses yesterday, I'm gonna take advantage and, as I said, remove each wheel in turn in order for you to see the procedure a little better. And after I've removed the wheel, I'm gonna start with the first step, which is very important, and which is to give your bleeder valve the maximum chance of opening, which is especially important if you haven't touched it in a while, because it's not really uncommon, and there are many YouTube videos out there describing what happens when you can't actually open it, either because it was too tight inside the caliper from the last time or because it rusted in place. And the idea is that you want to open it without breaking it, because if you break it, you're pretty much stuck along with your car. You can't really drive anywhere, and you'll have to go through the hassle of removing whatever bleeder stub is left, or at the worst case, get a new caliper. And to actually give it this best chance, start by cleaning the area around it with a metal brush, just as I did yesterday when I changed the hoses. Make liberal use of brake cleaner to get dust out, and maybe even apply penetrating oil and let it soak in for a while. And after the penetrating oil has done its job, clean everything up again. Use a closed head 10mm spanner like the one I have here and put it over the valve's nut, and then bring a thin tube that will route fluid from the valve to a container. This is my container from yesterday. There's still a bit of dirt in it from when I cleaned the calipers and such. Just go ahead and ignore that. I just haven't had time to clean it, so we'll leave it as is. And I'll be using a one-way valve. See the arrow pointing downwards, which is a very neat device that helps you a lot, because what it does, it allows fluid and air to go one way but prevents air from going backwards. And this thing would allow you to bleed the brakes yourself without needing a second person or helper. However, I'm gonna be using a helper anyways, just so I can film stuff and comment on it. Having said that, my setup is ready. Tube connected to the valve and the output of the valve to the container. And before I start, let me just go through the steps that you would need to follow if you don't use one of these valves and just have a tube routed directly to a container. And what you would want to do is you would want that tube to go in the container that already has some clean brake fluid in, such that the end of the tube is not exposed to air but only to clean fluid. The idea being that as fluid is coming out, as your helper will be pressing the pedal, whatever air is being pushed out is going to go into the fluid and bubble out, and as your helper is releasing the pedal, it won't draw in air, but instead it'll draw in fresh fluid. And at that point, the steps should be as follows. With the valve closed, your helper pushes a few times on the brake pedal and holds it down. You crack open the valve by about 45 degrees, which should be enough, and you should see some fluid come out. You then close the valve back, and then your helper releases the pedal. And then you repeat the procedure for as many times as needed until the fluid coming out is clean. In my case, because of the one-way valve, we'll just crack open the bleeder, and then my helper is simply going to press the brake pedal repeatedly and fluid is going to come out. So let's do that. First, open the reservoir cap so that air can get in and not cause a vacuum to form, which would hinder the pressing of the pedal and the removal of the brake fluid. And let's crack the bleeder. I said 45 degrees. Fluid's already coming out. Okay, you can push the brakes. My lady's helping. So that was 7 presses and she's holding onto the pedal now. I'm closing the bleeder. Here is the fluid that came out, which is very clean, as expected, given that it's very fresh. And normally after 7 to 10 presses, we go to the fluid reservoir, check the level and top up as necessary. Case in point, here's the level, and as you can see it dipped below max, whereas before it was somewhere around here. Now we top up to max. Okay, it's at max level now. And now normally you would repeat the procedure, open the valve, bleed after 7 to 10, close it, refill the reservoir and so on, until, as I said, fluid that comes out is clean. But in my case, because it's already clean, we're gonna stop here with this wheel. So with the valve closed, we remove the bleeder tube, remove the spanner, and the valve should be torqued to 10 or 11 Newton meters. Like so. And this wheel is done. Then for good measure inside the car, after the valve is closed, press on the brake pedal. You should definitely feel it firm up and offer resistance. And after pressing on the pedal, do a visual checkup to make sure that the valve does not leak. So in our case, I put the wheel back on. Everything is good on this side. Let's move on to the front left. Here we are at the front left wheel. The wheel has been already removed. There is our breather valve. We remove the cap. Normally, just as before, you should clean it up, apply penetrating oil, let it soak in to ease its opening. In my case, I won't do that again because I know it's gonna open because I just opened it yesterday. Okay, and here's the setup as before. Again, I haven't cleaned the container, nor will I. I'll just collect all the fluid and take a look at it later. Okay, my lady's at the wheel. Let's crack the bleeder valve. 45 degrees. And 7 brake pedals, please. Thank you. Closing the valve. Okay, you can release the pedal. Thank you. At the last press she was holding on to it, and in order for me to close the valve, and after I did, I asked her to release it. And just as before, I'm gonna take the tube out, though you should continue until fresh fluid comes out. And the spanner. And let's torque the valve, again 10 to 11 Newton meters. Done. And after torquing the vent, don't forget to press the brake pedal a few times to make sure there are no leaks. Could you press it one more time, please? Is it solid?
Yes, yes.
Perfect. So it's solid, and as you can see, no leaks. Perfect. And don't forget to put the dust cover cap back when you're done. And top up after the 7 brake pedal presses, again to the max. Okay, done. The next one is going to be the rear left wheel. So here's the rear left wheel. With the setup done, again, in your case, spend time cleaning and helping the valve to slacken before. So, slacken the valve, 45 degrees, and 7 brake pedal presses, please. Okay, 7, closing, removing the tube. You can release, thank you. And the spanner, cleaning up. Torque the valve. Good. And remember to put the dust cap back, though I seem to have misplaced mine, so I'll have to go and look for it. And top up with brake fluid. Seems I overdid it a bit, but that's fine, we still have one more wheel to go. And here's everything set for the front right wheel, the last one. So, we crack the bleeder open, 45 degrees, 7 presses please. Okay, close it, release, thank you, and one more time, tube out, spanner out, torquing, cleaning, wiping, and leak testing. Press the brake please. Is it solid? Perfect. And we have no leaks, which is good news. So our 4 wheels are properly bled. Let's put the last tire out, and then we have one more test to go before we can head out. And with the last wheel installed, we're now at the point where we do the last top up of the fluid reservoir, and the recommendation is to top it up to max. But I actually want to take the opportunity for a quick comment right here, and to actually raise the question, should you do the last brake fill top up to the max? Well, the answer is yes in most cases, but you have to think what happens if, for example, in the near future, you're going to replace some of the braking components like pads or discs. Because when you do that, what you usually need to do is you usually need to push the caliper piston or caliper pistons all the way back to actually make room for the new discs and or pads. And when you do push the piston back, all the fluid that's inside the caliper needs to go somewhere. Now what you can do at that point, you can actually open the bleeder valve, at which point the fluid will come out of the valve and you will be fine. But if you don't do that, the only way for the fluid to go is back through the system and up inside the reservoir. Meaning that if you fill it up now to the max and in a week or a month from now you're changing components, as you're pushing the pistons in, the fluid level will actually go past the maximum and you risk having issues such as fluid spills or overpressure or whatever else. Now in my case, I'm not gonna change brake components anytime soon, and when I do, I will keep this aspect in mind. I'll open the fluid reservoir as I'm pushing the pistons, and if the fluid goes over the max, I'll simply remove some of it with the syringe. And it's advisable for you to do the same if you'll be in a similar situation. So, having said that, top up to the max. And there's max. And this is also going to help us in the test drive to have a reference value and see after the test drive if the level in the reservoir dropped, because if it did, it means we have a leak somewhere. But hopefully that won't be the case. And when all is done, put the cap back on and tighten it properly. And for the last test, after all wheels are installed, again, because we have sufficient room underneath the car. We're gonna start the engine and go to each caliper, apply the brakes, and again check for leaks. The argument being that with the engine on, you also have the booster supplying additional pressure. So if there's any leaks, you're bound to see them once the booster is active. Or equivalently, if there are no leaks, then it's a safe bet that everything is in order. So let's start the car. Okay, apply the brakes. Okay, release. Apply the brake. Release. Apply. Release. Okay. So rear left is good. Let's go to rear right. Apply. Release. Apply. Release. All good here as well, no leaks. Front left. Apply. Release. Apply. Release. Apply. Release. All good here as well. And last one, front right. Apply. Release. Apply. Release. One more time. Apply. And release. And we're good. So we don't have any leaks anywhere. And we can go out for a test drive. Okay, you can shut the engine off. Thank you. And now with all wheels on the ground, we need to also torque them down before heading out. 105 to 110 Newton meters each in a star pattern. All right, and the same for the others as well. And here we are in our test drive. Just some casual driving with multiple cycles of accelerating and braking to make sure there are no issues. And for good measure, a brake, a hard brake from higher speed. And yes, everything feels normal, just as it did before. So I'm very happy with the results. And back from the test drive, underneath the car, let's take a look. We have no leaks here, nor at the leader valve, which is good. And there are no leaks at the connections between the hose and the pipes, which is again okay. And we see there are no leaks at the leader, which is very good. This is the left side. And at the back, this is the left part. Up here all is well. Down here all is well. And the leader's fine as well. And on the right side, similarly, no problem here, no problem here, and no problem up here. Perfect. And after shutting the engine off, let's take a look at the fluid level as well. It was at max before the test drive, and it's still at max now, maybe even higher because there's some heat in it as well. combined with the fact that we've seen no leaks at any of the bleeders, leads us to conclude that the fluid replacement has been successful and everything is in order, which is very good, and it means we can move on to the conclusions now. Alright folks, after a few 100 kilometers of problem-free driving, I checked all 4 wheels. I've got no leaks. The fluid level in the brake fluid reservoir is where it should be at the max line, so all is well from the procedure's perspective. And I just want to touch on a few important details. First, and the most critical, do keep in mind that brake fluid is extremely toxic and corrosive to paint. If you get it on any of the car's painted surfaces, clean it up immediately, because even a few minutes can damage the paint. But more importantly, always collect spilled brake fluid in a container and keep that one safe and sealed, because if animals or children get access to it and drink from it, heaven forbid, there is a real risk of death. So pay particular attention. Also, since you're touching the braking system, only tackle this procedure if you're confident you can see it through, and do it with patience and care, because the risk of a badly done bleed is the loss of braking performance, which can lead to major accidents. Procedure-wise, I would recommend you first spend time to clean up the area around each of the bleeder valves, and then apply penetrating oil to maximize your chances of the bleeder valves opening normally. If you try but you see you can't open the bleeder valve, either take the car to a garage or just leave it as it is, because too much force can actually snap the valve, and then you have to take the caliper off the car and get it somewhere where the remaining bleeder stub can be hopefully removed. If not, you would have to buy a new caliper as well, which is a lot of money. As for the opening for all 4 wheels, a maximum of 45 degrees of opening is sufficient. You don't need more, because if you do more, you risk allowing air to get in between the bleeder's threads and get inside the caliper, which would be counterproductive. Also keep in mind the wheel order in which you should bleed the brakes, as I explained at the beginning, and always consider sourcing a good quality replacement brake fluid. The car allows for .3 or .4. It makes a lot of sense to just go with .4, as I did. Now I chose this ATE Typ200 because I used it on the Opel and on the Kia a few years ago as well, and it's behaved without reproach. But there are many other brands as well that sell good quality brake fluids, so I'm not sponsored by ATE or anything. This is just my personal opinion. I do like their products because I've used them and they've all behaved very, very well. Now, a 1 liter bottle of this particular type of brake fluid cost me about 15 euros. So it's not particularly cheap, but again, quality should be the main criteria here and not cost. Now, with regards to quantity, 1 liter of this stuff should be sufficient, but if you want to be extra safe, you can buy 2 liters and just bleed each wheel for a longer time and use all of those 2 liters. You can't really go wrong. And with that said, we're done. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found the video useful. If you did, and if you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. Hope you have a lovely day, and I'll catch you all next time. Take care and goodbye.